Feel like you're being pulled in 1,000 directions? Let's fix that. Download your free rebalancing toolkit and learn how to design an optimized week that lets you feel like you have it all. Get the goods at brilliantbalance.net/have-it-all.
I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. Hello, you are listening to episode 29 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And as we sit here in the middle of May and we near the end of another school year, start thinking about what's been accomplished this year, where are the kids, what have they done, what have they learned? We're summarizing things, we're prepping for graduations, we're prepping for that final report card. I think naturally a lot of us start to assess ourselves at the same time that our children are being assessed. And that can be a really good practice, but sometimes it can take us to a place of being potentially too hard on ourselves, or at least of feeling like we're being too hard on ourselves. Most women, I would say, are pretty hard on themselves, at least most of the women I know. They can get into a cycle of really not thinking they're doing anything well enough, and that kicks off this constant cycle of guilt, I'm not doing anything well, I'm not ever being where I really should be, or even shame. Of feeling like we're not living up to the standard that someone has set for us or that we've set for ourselves. We really become our own worst critic. And I've talked on the show before about the inner critic and just how insidious that voice can be. In fact, I would say we often project those thoughts of the inner critic onto others, even when they aren't really having those thoughts about us. There's kind of a famous story about the coach of the U.S. women's soccer team a number of years ago, back in the era when Mia Hamm was playing on that team. And as the story goes, he says that he learned a lot about how women think by coaching that women's soccer team. Because prior to that, when he had coached groups of men, if he gathered the team into a huddle and provided sort of group feedback, we're not working hard enough, or I didn't really see enough hustle out there, or you all aren't working on this particular skill. Afterward, if he debriefed with any individual guy on the team, that guy was 100% sure that the coach was talking about someone else. He was doing just fine. It was someone else on the team with the problem. Clearly, he might even be able to identify who it was. Conversely, when this coach had the same conversation with a women's team, again, group feedback, we're not hustling, we're not. Later, when he would pull aside any given woman from the team, she was 100% convinced that the feedback was directed at her as an individual. She took responsibility for it. She took ownership. She was sure that she was the person letting the team down. And I've been so struck by that pattern in the years since reading that interview that I absolutely watch that play out every single day in my work with women, where we talk to a group and that individual is convinced that the feedback is for her. So today, what I want to do is look at a few different patterns that you might be in that honestly could be causing you undue pain. They're criticism patterns that when you are really hard on yourself, you might fall into these patterns regularly. And again, I think it's somewhat natural, particularly when you're a high achiever and you have a high standard, to fall into this pattern. But the danger is in staying there, in not knowing how to move through this thought pattern to a better place. And so I'm going to talk about both today. There's really three thoughts or patterns of thought that we're going to assess. And then I want to talk specifically about what you might do to move through them to get to a better place where that pattern of being hard on yourself may actually be productive. It might be useful to get you to the next level. So the first pattern that I see is constant comparison to others. I want to look like her. I want to sound like her. I want to have the kind of money she has. I want to have the kind of home that she lives in. Look at how great her husband is. Look at how well behaved her adorable children are. Gosh, I wish I had that job that this, friend of mine has, or look at the car that she just bought, or the extraordinary talent that she has for singing or sewing or whatever it might be. Most of us can go through a lot of the day in a cycle of constant comparison to everyone else. And I've talked about this before, that social media has really just put a spotlight on this pattern that was already very prevalent. It's just become a whole lot easier to have a lens into other people's lives. So if you think about a typical conversation in this territory, let's say you go to coffee with a friend and you start comparing yourself to someone unfavorably, or maybe you're talking to your mom or a sister. What most people will do instinctively to comfort you is tell you that you're being too hard on yourself. They'll tell you, stop comparing. You don't understand her whole life. Maybe there's parts of her life that are terrible and you're only comparing to this one highlight. And I do understand that perspective. In fact, I have some heart for that perspective. But I would tell you that if you really want what she has, then you need to go get it. Being in the state of comparison is like getting stuck at the assessment phase and not actually creating a course of action to go after what it is that you want. And sometimes I think we get trapped in a scarcity mindset here, where we think that because she has it, that you can't have it too. Right? It's such a flawed pattern. As soon as you say it out loud, you see the logic flaw in it. There really is enough to go around. But our unconscious mind sort of lives in that world of, well, if she has a great husband, then I can't have one. Or if she has a great wardrobe, then I'm always going to look like a slob. It's just not true. So the key is, when you find yourself in that constant state of comparison, it's deciding what you really want and then figuring out what are the actions that you might take to go after it, right? If you stop at comparison, you're letting yourself off the hook, and you can just stay in a loop of self-criticism that is not going to get you where you want to go. Okay, so that's the first pattern.
Feel like you're being pulled in 1,000 directions? Let's fix that. Download your free rebalancing toolkit and learn how to design an optimized week that lets you feel like you have it all. Get the goods at brilliantbalance.net/have-it-all.
The second pattern that could cause you to feel like you're too hard on yourself, or have other people telling you that you're too hard on yourself, is if you find yourself in a pattern of dwelling in the past. Essentially reliving your past mistakes over and over again. When I was in junior high, we had cassette tapes. We didn't have CDs so much yet. I think they were out, but not like recordable. And what I remember about that era of my life, and you might too if you're my age, is making mixtapes. This was very important because it was the only way that you could play those, favorite songs from the 80s and the early 90s on repeat. There really wasn't another way to do it. You had to catch it, maybe when it was on the radio, or take it from one tape to another if you were lucky enough to have a tape-to-tape recorder. And then you could play that song over and over again. And that was glorious, okay? But when you put something negative on repeat, your own worst hits, that is not so good. In fact, if you have a past mistake, an error in judgment, something you would have done differently, and you keep ruminating on it, just beating yourself up about how horribly you handled that situation, you're really just chronically making yourself miserable. Okay, so we definitely could agree you're being hard on yourself, but it's the being stuck at that point of looking backwards that really is the problem. What you want to do is extract the lesson from that experience and apply it going forward. That's the hard work. I sometimes say high-performing people do not dwell in the past. They look to the past for lessons and insights and patterns. That's essential. But then they pull those lessons forward so they don't repeat the same mistakes. Because the truth is, and we both know it, you can't go back and change anything in the past. What's done is done. The only thing you really have full control over is the present moment and your plans for the future. So that breaking that pattern of just staying stuck in the past and sort of wishing things had been different or that you had handled things differently and converting that to a pattern where you assess the past, you mine it for insights or lessons that you can extract and apply going forward, that shift sort of allows you to appropriately chastise yourself for any mistakes you've made, but learn from them. That's really the critical piece, is the forward action. Okay, and there's a third one. The third one is a pattern of focusing on what I'll call gap to goal. How far are you from where you want to be? And I think the pattern I see people fall into is, I'm not there yet, so I'm miserable. And again, when you say this to somebody who loves you, a family member, a good friend, what they are likely going to tell you is, it's okay, you're just being too hard on yourself, right? So we start to believe that. But I think they might be wrong. I think that the message I want you to take away is that gap is in fact important. That gap between where you are and where you want to be, your goal, it represents your unrealized potential. And you probably should be impatient about wanting to close that gap. Closing that gap is your life's work. There's power in closing that gap and getting to where you want to go. But if you are staring at the gap and not focused on how you'll close it, what is your effort? What is your commitment? What is your consistency of actions that you're going to take to close it? Then you're looking at the wrong thing, right? It's kind of staring up at that bar that's unattainably high and just lamenting the fact that you can't reach it, versus having all that mental energy redirected toward problem solving. What could you do to close the gap? What actions could you be taking? How could you be a little bit better every day? How could you be a little bit closer every day? So that over time, with that effort and that commitment and that consistency, you will watch that gap narrow to the point where it disappears. So you see the difference between, am I focused on the gap? I'm not where I want to be, kind of implies I'm never going to be there. The difference of saying, what are the actions I can take today to get me closer, puts you back in that agency mindset of really being able to affect your current situation and change your future. So we started this episode by asking, are you being too hard on yourself? And my question to you at this point is, are you? Are you being too hard on yourself and you need to cut yourself some slack? Or is it that you're getting stuck at that point of observation, of assessment, instead of moving into action? Because those three habits, comparing yourself to others, dwelling in the past, and focusing on the gap to goal, they can be very hard on your psyche. You can wreck your life. You can wreck your day, your week, your month. Honestly, your whole life by having most of your thoughts consumed with comparison and rumination and just awareness of not being where you want to be. That's a pretty depressing existence. And what it really can be is a hiding place. Those thought patterns can be a hiding place that are allowing you really not to focus on what matters the most, what the things that actually can change your life, your actions, the things that you're going to do from day to day. So if you want to be like her, or you want to not repeat that mistake, or you want to close that gap to your goal, you need to chart a course of action. And ideally, it's a series of actions in the right sequence so that you can see progress and so that you can get to where you want to go quickly and with as little friction as possible. And, just remember, my team and I are always standing by to help if you want to shape that journey together. It's what we do all day, every day. But it is really important that you move out of the assessment and rumination chapter where you're just beating yourself up about what is. And you start really dreaming about what could be and building your plans to get there. That shift is a very powerful one, and one that I hope, if you haven't made it already, that you use today's episode as your touchstone to make the choice, to shift into that pattern. So the next time that we're together, we're going to talk about something that's kind of connected to this. We're going to talk about a highly seductive process. And honestly, it's kind of a dangerous one. It's the act of being chosen for something. And what we're going to share next week is really probably dramatically going to shift your perspective on the whole process of choosing where you want to go, being in charge of deciding where you want to go, instead of giving that control to someone else. So I want you to make sure you tune in for that, because if you are planning to chart a course of action to get you where you want to go, we have to have a warning label on this detour that could come your way around being chosen or being picked for something. So that's next time. And between now and then, make sure you hop over to brilliantbalance.net/have-it-all. Download that rebalancing toolkit, which will give you a great framework to get started in this work. Also, come and join us in the Brilliant Balance Facebook group. We have a great conversation going there about all of these topics week to week. So all you need to do to join us is go to Facebook, search for Brilliant Balance. That's the whole name. Click request to join, and we will welcome you in and get things rolling. That's all for today, my friends. Make it a great week, and let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.